right, John.
All right, Tiernan.
What the hell are we doing here?
3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago.
3 famous weeks ago.
About 3.5 weeks ago.
Yep.
We were having a conversation about podcasts. Yeah. And then we decided 3.5 weeks ago to do a podcast. And now we have a podcast.
3 cursed weeks ago, we decided to get into this. And now we're here.
Well, we had all the cameras and we had like a lot of the stuff that we needed, I suppose.
Yeah, it was kind of made sense. Didn't it?
It made sense to do it.
So, but it's been a long journey to get here.
Oh my God.
Is this the right time?
I think so. Like did we meet? I'm trying to think there now. I was just trying to think earlier. 2014, 13, 14. Was it? 14 maybe?
Yeah, it would have been, what's that, about 8 years ago?
About 8 years ago. About 4. Was it 14? It was 13 or 14.
When did you do cardboard?
That was 15, but it was the year before.
Yeah.
Because you were I think a therapist first.
Yeah.
Before you were working in the KCCB. I was there as a support worker in the morning group, and you used to come in and do the workshops with all of the support workers and key workers.
Yeah.
Do you remember? That's when I met you first.
Yeah.
And I know you were working with some of the clients there as well. And then it was the year later you set up your
Reach Out project. Yeah.
the Reach Out project,
Yeah.
And then and
you were there for then we were kind
I
of,
was there for about a year, I think.
Yeah.
2014 maybe.
Jesus, that flew, didn't it?
Didn't it? Like, Jesus.
A lot of changes.
A lot of changes.
Short films.
Yeah.
Wow.
Even that program, you set that up. Tell the audience who were listening a bit about that.
I suppose it's kind of one of very few programs that we're dealing with kind of cannabis addiction with the 18 to 25-year-old kind of bracket, which was a kind of an area where they thought there was a lot of issues in the city. You know, they couldn't get through. There wasn't a program. There wasn't many programs really that was kind of dealing with that. They were more dealing with kind of people addicted to kind of opiates or, you know, kind of stronger drugs, and they didn't see the issue of kind of cannabis addiction until it started to become immediately obvious within kind of, I suppose, that social group that there was a big problem. You know, a lot of young people were kind of withdrawn to their rooms and getting into problems with kind of, I suppose, own debts, wasn't it, and stuff like this. So I suppose the HSE and the Department of Social Protection wanted to do something about it. So hence the Reach Out project was born, and then we spoke together about kind of the creativity aspect of things. We knew that was
designed.
the case.
Tell them about the module kind of you designed. What it was about then.
Yeah, I suppose it was about kind of, I have this kind of belief that, you know, the mind and the body is kind of linked. It's kind of, obviously it's commonplace in regard to science now.
And being that it's the first episode, you let them know what's your background then.
Oh yeah, I'm an integrative psychotherapist.
And what does that mean exactly for people?
So I integrate different modalities of psychotherapy. So there's lots of different modalities. So there's a humanistic, which is kind of person-centered. There's CBT. There's systemics, which deals with families. There's psychosexual. There's nearly psychoanalysis. There's all different kind of aspects of psychotherapy. There's not one kind of model that fits all. So I suppose there is purists, people who just practice CBT, and that's what they do, and that's good for some people. Or
psychoanalysis.
Or people who practice psychoanalysis. So I integrate really all the modalities based on the client that presents, as opposed to my knowledge in a modality. So,
yeah, because it's kind of like people go and you hear the CBT has become a big buzzword, and people are going, you know, I hear people, I need to go and do the CBT.
Yeah.
Not knowing that maybe that's not right for you. Even the CBT, what is CBT therapy?
Yeah, cognitive behavioural therapy. I suppose it is good. You know, a guy called Ellis developed it. He had kind of social anxiety, and one of the major things that he wanted to overcome was this kind of aspect of challenging himself in social environments. So he devised this, I suppose now it's a famous kind of setup where he went into Central Park and he asked 100 women out for a date. But the objective wasn't to get a date. The objective was desensitize himself to the anxiety of asking for a date. Nobody gave him a date. But I don't think he was too bothered. He overcame the anxiety. So I suppose that was the cornerstone for that. And it's linking kind of cognition, which is thoughts, with behaviours, and then there's emotions, and then the physical aspect of how your body reacts when you might be feeling anxious or depressed. It's drawing awareness to that, and then it's giving you kind of techniques that you follow over a kind of a schedule. It could be weekly, it could be daily, it could be monthly, and you learn new ways of being and behaving and stuff like that, and that changes your emotional kind of setup, really. So it's an interesting modality. It's great, like, for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everything.
Like, there might be someone with deep trauma who needs psychoanalysis.
Yeah, so CBT famously doesn't go into the past. It deals with the present, and it deals with how you function in your environment and how you are functioning as a human being. So psychoanalysis would be kind of dealing with the more, and psychodynamic theories would be dealing with the kind of the unconscious, these processes where you bury things like repression and stuff like that, and sublimation, which would be kind of Freudian theories. So they go into the depths of maybe your family. So a lot of people, when they're going to therapy, they go, I don't want to go in there because I'm going to be talking about my family and my childhood and all this. And that's not necessarily the case with CBT. But psychoanalysis, it's probably years you're in psychoanalysis. CBT, you could be in it for probably 12 weeks. That's the general kind of time frame for it. But it's there are two kind of modalities that if you're an integrative therapist, you can kind of take the best of both. So you can go back, you can go forward, you can go everywhere.
Then aside from that, you're also a cognitive scientist. Explain that one first, Tiernan.
Okay, so I shifted from cognitive science into psychotherapy. But cognitive science is an interesting field. It's kind of to do with how you think, how you operate. And I suppose the real kind of setup behind cognitive science is that it's trying to look at how computers operate and how human brains. So they famously say wetware and dryware. So you've got like dryware, which is computers, and wetware is the human brain. And it's about kind of the interaction between both. So cognitive scientists are looking at the mind and what creates the mind in the human, and can we create a mind in a computer? You know, it's so you know, one of the main things you'd be looking at would be the philosophy of mind. What is it to be a thinking, conscious human being with a mind as opposed to a brain?
Yeah.
So it's artificial intelligence, it's brain-computer interface, and so how you interface a brain and a computer together and get the best of both. And
you actually, the thing you created, what was that thing you were telling me about before? Some parts of the mind. Yeah,
I was looking at a thing called, it was a kind of, there's a neural system called the mirror neuron system in the brain. And there's very few creatures on the planet that has this. It's how we learn. So, for example, if you see a chimpanzee, say bonobo, they famously use tools, and you think to yourself, they don't necessarily have language. So how do these kind of chimpanzees learn how to use tools? So it turns out, anyhow, they have a very advanced mirror neuron system. So they mirror what's going on in front of them. So the mother will show the baby how to use a tool, and what happens is, in the baby's brain, the neural kind of structures that are around kind of movement are activated in the same way as the mother's is. So the brain starts to wire around the movement, the observation of the movement of the mother, and that's how they learn it. So we have it, parrots have it, chimpanzees have it, and it's a really interesting kind of part of the brain, because some people call it the empathy system. So it's the way we empathize, and we can see other people's pain, and we get an idea of how people are without them saying anything. You know, you look at anybody's eyes and you see what's going on in their body movements. You get a sense of what's going on, and that's your mirror neuron system kicking in. So what I did is I designed a video game, and I plugged somebody into an EEG, which is this kind of, I suppose it listens to the frequency of the brain, the neurons firing. And I was playing computer games with someone's brain without them knowing.
So break that down. What's that about, man?
I was thinking about doing it for neurorehabilitation. So say somebody I was working in brain injury for a while. Say somebody had like a traumatic brain injury. Say it could be from stroke, it could be from anything, or, you know, a car crash. You know, the parts of the brain could be damaged. So I was thinking of a way. There's a thing called Hebb's law, which is basically what's fires together, wires together. So if you practice enough in a particular part of your brain, it rewires the brain. It's kind of neural plasticity, it's called. So I was interested really in trying to figure out how I could rewire around areas that were damaged. So firstly, I had to develop a system that I could basically use to manipulate a brain without anybody knowing. And I knew that video games were a good one, because people get engrossed in video games. But I basically programmed the video game to only fire when a specific part of the brain would fire.
Right.
So it proved to me that you could basically control a brain and, you know, through rehearsal, develop a new kind of pattern of neural behavior.
And what sort of things could you see you pick up from that?
You could see, well, I suppose for me, like what I was looking at, I was looking at a particular part of the brain, which is the mirror neuron system. I could see that, you know, if you had people who were really empathetic, it was easier to kind of program the computer with their empathy and stuff, and their mirror neurons fired quicker.
Oh, right.
So you could kind of see empathy in action, you know.
That's mad.
Yeah, it was really bizarre.
And could you see depression?
No.
No. Or could you see a head injury? You obviously.
Yeah, with EEGs,
trauma.
you can see
That's what
head.
it is.
Yeah, well, you would look at it and, you know, obviously.
You see if someone had kind of slight, like, you know, like a bit of a boxer that's still all right.
Yeah.
Could you see that?
Yeah, what you're doing is that
CTE.
part of the brain wouldn't fire as efficiently as other parts of the brain. So effectively what you would see is you'd see a slowdown in responses. So you'd know that something was damaged there.
And you've been telling me years you're going to put that on my head and you still didn't do it.
I know. But you know what it's great for as well?
That.
Do you know what it's great for as well? There's a thing called an alpha wave. And an alpha wave is really interesting because when you close your eyes, when you go like this and just close your eyes, a wave goes through your brain that you can actually see on an EEG, like it's a big spike.
That's why the top athletes do that before penalty. The archers do it right before.
Well, we did stuff
boxers
with,
even do it.
Yeah, so it is. It's about that kind of just close your mind. So if you look at mindfulness, you know, some people close their eyes and then they get into this state. So it's the brain. The eyes are telling the brain, you know, it's time to relax. It's time to kind of, lights are going out kind of thing. So it's time to shut the brain down. So you get this alpha wave, which is a really soothing wave, and it gets you ready for rest. So you can see things like that, really interesting things in the brain. You know?
And that's why as well you started off the mornings in the reach out group always with a bit of mindfulness and closing the eyes.
Yeah.
Kind of reduce the anxiety in the room.
That's it, yeah.
And what was the program? Obviously I know just for people at home, what was it structured around? And that's kind of brings kind of how we kind of came together a bit as well.
Yeah, it's structured around kind of physical well-being, so a lot of training. So we get people in who are basically sedentary, you know what I mean? The thing about cannabis is that people get apathetic and they kind of withdraw, you know? It's like alcohol, you know? Some people can drink a few pints and they're quite happy with that. And then you get addicts, you get alcoholics. Cannabis is no different. So you get people who can smoke and it's just recreational drug for them. But you get people who are addicted. And it tends to be the people who are addicted to cannabis is they withdraw. They can get acute depression and anxiety from the withdrawal. So if you're stuck in your room, you're going to maybe be a bit more social anxious. You might get a bit of agoraphobia, a bit of fear of going outside, open spaces, leaving the room. Self-esteem drops. And you get an array of psychological conditions that comes from that kind of withdrawing. Because we're social creatures. Like, we're designed to be social. And I suppose with cannabis addiction, it tends to be that people withdraw from society, and they kind of their primary kind of goal is to get stoned, you know. Yeah. So I had these young people, and I had to kind of rehabilitate them back into society. And the first place we started really was the physical well-being, you know.
Exercise was so important for that.
Lots of exercise, swimming, weight training, getting people to feel, you know, to connect their body back to
out diving and all that kind of stuff, running up the sand dunes and
running on sand dunes into the sea.
And you do your mental health workshops, which I remember. I used to love. I was there as a support worker, and I was learning as much as any lads, if not more. I was telling them to be quiet now so I could hear. Because I remember, like, there was a particular mental health workshop you done, and it was about just family dynamics. Yeah, and and the rebellious child and all this stuff. And what happened was I kind of had one of those light bulb moments where I'd realised that I was blaming my little brother on our relationship being rocky. Yeah. And not taking any of the blame myself. Yeah. And I saw in that moment all the passive aggression, all the stuff I was doing and coming with authority all the time. And it wasn't working. And I went back to them and I said, look, we're killing each other, we're baiting each other, we're doing all this stuff. Yeah. And it's not working. And here's where I'm coming from. And I take the blame too. It's as much my fault as yours. Can we now just talk to each other and not roar at each other again? And that must have been 6-7 years ago. And we never roared at each other since. Never roared at each other. Yeah. Since that, in 6-7 years. Yeah. Because we made a pact with each other that we were going to communicate directly to each other. So and it made our relationship much, much better to this day, you know?
Yeah, no, that's good.
And we've a lot of now love for each other. We show a lot of love for each other now. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's completely different.
No, and that's kind of systemic. So that's you know, you have CBT, CBT, CBD, CPT. Some would argue that one is better than the other, but I'm not going to get into that.
You know, that's for another day.
Maybe a combination of both. I'm into it, you know. But I think it's that's systemics. So that's, I think, you know, when you come to a situation where somebody is, you know, having problems at home, like the home is the factory we're built in. And unfortunately, we all come out of factories to build wobbly wheels. So it's a matter of identifying, you know, what's the issues. But I suppose within this system, the family system, there's always one person that becomes the identified patient. We know them as IPs. And basically what that is that if a family isn't working well together, there's something wrong. They'll always find somebody who's the sickest in that family. And they'll say, the reason why we are in this situation is because of this fella or this woman. And everybody kind of centers all of the family issues around this person. If this person would only get better, we'd all be great. So the thing is, when the identified patient realizes what's going on, or if you recognize an identified patient in your family, if you go to them like the way you did and said, listen, peace be with you kind of thing, let's just drop this. It gives the identified patient an opportunity to get out of that role, and it gives them hope to be able to move forward. The only thing is, usually the family falls apart then, because what happens is the identified patient gets better, right? And everybody goes, hang on a second, we don't have a scapegoat, right? So it's like, oh no! So they all then have to do it.
We fall apart every year.
Yeah, well, this is it. This is every family, you know?
Like, that's the thing. Families, man. Yeah. On the outside, looking in, everything is always cozy.
Yeah.
And with every family, they're all mad. Because we all know each other's madness so well. We have our own little world separate to everybody else, and the way we communicate and communicate with undercurrents and all that stuff. You know what I mean? It's they all have their own
subtle
group
rules.
Identity.
There's subtle rules, and every family has this kind of unconscious and conscious rule system.
Yeah.
And I suppose what you do is you just don't want to break those rules, because if you break those rules, you can end up as an IP. Identified patient.
That'll be me next.
And then you're the old scapegoat or the black sheep. And forget about that.
The old victim. And then another thing was creativity then on the course, which was very important.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit of I suppose it's, you know, creativity is very important, you know, to life, because it allows you to take control of certain things. When you're being creative, you're in control of that creative space. And a lot of people in their lives don't have control, and that causes issues. So if you think that something's beyond you, that you can't control the outcome or the process, which is more important than creativity, then you lose all aspects of control in your life, or you have this kind of delusion that, you know, the world is against you, that everybody's out to get you, that, you know, there's something wrong with everybody else, but you're operating in this world, and in some way you've been treated unfairly. So I think for creativity, it's important for people to understand that they have control in their lives, which gives them opportunities to make choices. And when they realize that a lot of their lives are kind of going into a disarray because they're making poor choices, if they bring creativity into their lives, they can realize that they have control and then take control of the choices they make. And then there's hope, you know? Yeah.
That thing of a better tomorrow, a better future, creativity does that, doesn't it?
It does.
That's what it does for people, really gives them.
Yeah.
We saw it even with the lads, like that's where I suppose that was the origins of Cluster Fox Films.
Yeah.
Our company that we own together, in which we make films. We make films for the voiceless, basically.
Yeah, voice of voiceless, isn't it?
Yeah, voiceless. That's kind of our team, isn't it?
Yeah. I suppose it's kind of given. I suppose we're given a certain narrative and opportunity, isn't it? It's, you know, people that basically feel that they've never been heard.
Yeah,
we're all about that, aren't we? Just giving them a voice. Like,
well, look, Tiernan, I'm from fucking Darndale. You're from Ballymun. You know what I mean? We know about people who have no voice, and unfortunately, in the arts, we don't see our people being represented.
No.
And when they are, they're usually represented by someone from a different class and looking through a patronising lens, which is horrific. And then you look at artists from working class and traveller backgrounds and that, who don't have the money to sustain themselves and actually get to that level where they finally succeed. They all fall off, you know, because it's such a tough industry, and it seems to be kind of a small club as well, you know, because we're a small little island, and the elite are a small little elite group who all know each other, and it's kind of hard to break through that door. So you see a lot of artists dropping off, and that's what's like untapped potential or unfulfilled potential to me is like a horror movie.
That's heartbreaking,
isn't it?
Because you know we live in a society and we live in a globe that's really kind of competitive in a lot of ways. And you would think, the Irish in the past, we've had so many literary greats and we've had so much talent and creativity, coming from all walks of life. Brennan Behan, it's Oscar Wilde, God knows, there's a list of them. We're making stuff about it, like.
Yeah.
But I suppose when you only have one singular view of the world, one kind of worldview, which comes from a specific kind of socio-economic group, then the opportunity to lose a huge array of talent is phenomenal. And that's a voice in a time frame, in an epoch, that can never be recovered,
Yeah.
So for us, like we decided that, we would try to get as many diverse voices and stories that represents our time.
Yeah.
Into our films.
And we actually recognize the fucking benefit of that.
Yeah.
That this is a whole other world.
Yeah.
There's many different Irelands to explore on film and documentary.
Yeah.
Many different groups. And there's really only one, there's one kind of dominating one right now at the moment. And we've rich sources of storytelling there. And it's not being used.
Well, our culture is based on storytelling.
Of course it is.
The campfire, the Shanachis, like we're legendary storytellers. I know. But I suppose it is about kind of giving the opportunity to people to tell their story. And there is a million stories. Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got a book. Don't they say that? Everybody's got a book. But it's about kind of giving the platform. And we set the company up with that premise, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, because I jumped on the course that you managed, and then we started doing some acting with the young fellas, and we saw some serious talent. I remember the first film that we done, Tiernan, me and you produced, that Patrick McDermott DOP.
Great film. It was on RTE.
Anastasia was on RTE, and the lads in that, Mark and Thomas and a few other, Danny and a few other lads. I mean, they never acted before in their life, and they just a number of weeks of kind of rehearsing over it and improvising around it, and the talent was like unbelievable. Like,
but I disagree with you. I think they were acting all the time.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Do you know what I mean? Because they just didn't know it.
No, that's very true.
Because I think a lot of them, came from certain environments that you had to act. Do you know what I mean? You had to put the best.
That's a very important point.
So these
because acting is a self-defense mechanism.
Yeah,
and we act like you act different with your mother than you act with me, or
totally.
You know what I mean? We're acting all the time. We don't. It's just becoming conscious of it then, and then holding it together with a performance. Yeah, which the lads done brilliantly. Like, incredible. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and somebody acting on them, and like I was like, I wish when I was writing a script I did some workshop days for Carver Gangsters, because some of the new terms that because I love those little colloquial terms. Like one of them was called like
slow yoked.
A slow yoke, which is like his annex or something. And I was like, slow yoke, that's fucking deadly. I love that kind of language, you know. And it was just so raw. Yeah. And it was brilliant, like, and I was so proud of the lads. And then we just continued on in little docs and shorts down there. And then eventually set up the company then. And we did a number of our own shorts, like, and slogged it out.
Festivals from Iraq to Mexico.
Slogged it out. Yeah. I remember we went over to Morocco.
Oh, do you remember that one?
With Kevin Kelly. Yeah. And we went over to the Berbers people. Yeah. Now, later I found out a story, because you remember we had this kind of experience over there. I'll get into that in a second. Yeah. But I found out later that the Berber, a Scotch Gaelic sailor landed there in Morocco, and this Berbers pirates kind of got him and whatever. But they were able to communicate with each other. This was the account through his Scotch Gaelic and their Berber language. Do you know what I mean? And then there was another instance of that 40 years later. And when we were over there, they sounded like that.
They did.
And the way they sang was so Shanos. It was exactly like the Shanos. And then, of course, that's where the banjo comes from, North Africa, like. And we were doing that documentary, and we had some crack, to be fair, over it, didn't we? Like, I remember, remember the little van. We're in this little van.
Oh, the Scooby-Doo van.
Oh, my God.
From the 60s.
And I'm afraid of my life with that. Like, I'm just afraid of death, basically. Yeah. So we're driving along a mountain, thousands of feet up in the air.
In the Atlas Mountains.
In the Atlas Mountains in Marrakesh, outside of Marrakesh.
Yeah.
Atlas Mountains, just outside Marrakesh in Morocco. And we're literally driving, and I'd say there's about 2 inches away from the cliff.
If I had a camera at the window,
yeah,
and you could actually see the wheels.
You have to prove for this.
Yeah,
actually, down the road when we do, because we're going to be doing kind of doc podcasts, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Yeah,
a mixture of documentary and podcast.
Yeah,
so we'll show some of that footage because that's fun.
Yeah.
But basically, I shit myself, and I was nearly crying, wasn't I, Tiernan? You have it all on camera, like.
Yeah.
And I basically opted to get on the roof, which I know sounds mad, but there was, right, but there was logic, right? The logic was, if I got up on the roof and instead to the right side up against the wall, if it went over the cliff, I could survive.
You had a fair jump.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I had a shot.
You didn't have to be Carl Lewis.
Whereas if you were inside the van, you're dead.
Yeah.
Like, you're just dead. Yeah. And there was high instances of accidents and all.
Yeah,
wasn't there?
Remember all the cars on the other side?
It was like a scrapyard. It was like a scrapyard.
Yeah.
But it was the scariest shit ever.
It was like Finglas South down in the night.
And then we went as far as we could go in the van, and then we have to walk. But when I mean walk, you're sliding sideways along a cliff, and it was the most anxiety I ever got in my life. And then we went up to a place where basically this place hasn't changed structurally for 3,000 years there in Asa.
It's literally, it's like walking into a feudal muck fortress, wasn't it?
Exactly like that. Feudal muck fortress, that's what it was, man. And the women never left the mountains in years. No. The women, like, it was a very...
Should you remember the gardens? They had this fortress, this like castle-like thing made out of...
Oh my God.
Mud blocks.
Which remember, it's like the Garden of Eden.
And it was like the Garden of Eden below, but you could see that it was like almost territorial. They were looking down and they could survey all the lands.
Oh, like these were proper mountainous people climbing mountains and all. Yeah. And I remember but Tiernan, they were the most hospitable people, weren't they, Tiernan? Beautiful people. Like, really, that bread that they made. Yeah. That bread was the best bread ever. No, I'm laughing. So, I know, and I'm taking too. I'm laughing. I have to tell it. You have to. Yeah, so so we went into one of these mud huts, and this fiend, this man, an old man, was our guide, right? But his hands was the dirtiest hands that I ever seen in my life, right? Anyway, I said nothing about the hands. Yeah. Right, listen, there was no fucking water or whatever, but the man's hands were very bad, right? He didn't mind it, I didn't mind it. Until the hospitality came. Until the hospitality came, this woman, this woman, she made us a big, huge tray of all different various Moroccan dishes, basically. Like a tangine thing, yeah. And everybody just dips their hands in, you know what I mean? So... And I'm fucking, that shit weirds me out, like, do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I kind of cultivate my own little space in the corner. And then, you had like a pizza slice in your mind. Yeah. And I was like, just eat there and like eat quick and just get out. And the germs won't fucking fly, you know, this is what I'm thinking, you know. But Sean, who's out there working with us there now, Sean was there. Yeah. And Sean is real agreeable, you know. And your man was right next to Sean, and he was dipping his big fucking dirty hands right in and going, rah, rah, and I'm nearly getting sick, like I'm getting a pain in the stomach. And I said, Sean loves that to your man. I said, your man, listen, he loves that there. See that there? Sean, get some of that. Yeah, exactly where he was. You set him up though, let's be honest. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You said to him, oh no, you can't turn these people down. It's very ignorant. Like if you have to go where they're going. Like, because I said, because I said to him, I said, Sean, this is like the traveller thing I told you. When you go to a traveller's place, you never turn down a cup of tea. If you do, it's bad insult. But this is 10 times worse, Sean, if you don't eat this food. Well, anyway, Sean had to get a bit of this big black dirt, whatever it was, curry thing, and put on it. And I was laughing. I couldn't laugh, but I was laughing inside, saying, "You sick man, Sean." But then Sean is deadly, right? But the thing was, remember I was doing the time lapse. We were on top of this mountain, and we could see this in the valley, this village, and they were all candlelit houses. Do you remember they were just? You could see all the candles coming on. So we decided that'd be an epic shot, coming out of the Atlas Mountains into the valleys and all the villages, just as the sun is going down, all the little flickering of the candle lights just coming across the whole valley, like a Mexican wave, wasn't it? Like just as the shadow went down, the sun went behind the mountain. It was just beautiful. It was an epic shot. So we were there, but it takes forever to get one of these time lapses, and we had like multiple cameras, maybe with 6 or 7 cameras set up just to make sure we got the perfect shot. And of course, everybody's manning a camera or being close to a camera in case it goes off or there's an issue. So Sean was up in the very top, wasn't he? And we were I was kind of running up and down. You were down at the other end, looking at another camera, and then up came these elderly Berber women. Yeah, and beautiful women.
Beautiful, generous women.
They were, yeah.
But they came up with a big bowl of food to feed us. Obviously, they were aware that, we were sitting on the top of the mountain and it was getting dark, and they were just so generous.
Oh.
But they came up, but the thing was, again, I think it's henna or something they had in their hands, but it's black, isn't it? It's like a black ink, but it's not the most appetizing thing to be
just optically, like,
to be licking their fingers,
and like, and you're going, you don't want to insult them when they're fucking lovely people, like.
So I seen the two elderly women, and they were feeding Sean, because Sean's that type of person, he probably brought out the maternal aspect of these women, but they were putting the food into his mouth.
I was looking up,
but he was calling me, and I was thinking it was a camera problem, and I was going up to him, and then I realised, no, he's trying to get me caught. So I left.
But I told him to call you.
Oh, you tried to set me up?
Yeah, that's right, isn't it, Sean? Yeah. Okay. I said, call Tiernan and see him nothing. I said, he's real agreeable as well. He's too empathetic. Your game. I made sure this day when I saw him coming from the distance, I belted down at the other camera, and I wasn't leaving that camera.
So now I find out, but I tell you, I was cute enough.
Yeah.
I seen the script. And I didn't like the ending.
Man, that was some crack though, wasn't it?
Great.
It was just magical. And then all the old kids, they come up to us and they'd be saying to us bonjour and all, wouldn't they? Because they thought we were French.
Yeah.
Obviously, Morocco being colonised by the French. And there was this band that were playing for us, and they were like a Shanos kind of trad band, but they were Berbers musicians, all the banjos.
Oh my God, do you remember that?
It was hypnotic, Tiernan. And whatever happened with the light coming down at a certain point, and the kids, hundreds of kids, and they were just the most beautiful children, weren't they?
Just really innocent,
really innocent and beautiful, and their imagination were wide. They didn't have any fucking iPads and Wi-Fi codes, you know what I mean? And they were asking us for sweets, and we bought them a load of sweets, remember?
Yeah. And well, you went out and you must have spent, how much did you must have spent a fortune
on sweets. I don't know what, big money anyway, but we weren't spending on them, so I just got it for the kids, and I just said, we'll give them out the sweets. And they were setting up fires and all, man. It was gas, because I was going, this is what we used to do as children. We'd fucking do all this, you know what I mean? In the camp. And you shot it all, and it's like fucking probably our best shot film like that we've done. Like the visuals is amazing. And then that's kind of, we went and did a little doc kind of separate to what we were doing on it. And that became Eden, wasn't it? And you said, John, we need to kind of replicate what we done there with your nieces and nephews on the site and all that, and your little cousins.
Just to show the kind of humanity and the way, and how we're really cross borders,
how we're connected.
Yeah, and we're all interconnected.
Exactly. Yeah. And then showing the kind of, and then the fire and what it represented that warmth and, humanity, but also the destruction of it then in the end. Yeah. And that became a great little short to travel all around the world. It premiered in Galway Film Flat, didn't it? Was it 17, 18 or something?
Yeah. 17, 17, was it?
Yeah. 17. Yeah. And that was a great experience, like, and it's just mad random, a bit of serendipity, because we went over for a different documentary and ended up making something different out of it.
But we were smart enough to see the essence of what was there.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes you just got to run when you're making films with the essence. Yeah. Come off script. Like, how many times have we done that?
Like even in The Black Wealth, which is our new film and our first feature drama, and the Black Wealth were a group of people in ancient Rome that wanted to uphold the power of the Pope, essentially Pope Lilas, and they banished and massacred people. And this is kind of a modern kind of play on Dante's Inferno, the Seventh House of Lust. Yeah. Set in Dublin, and it's about kind of intergenerational trauma and that, and there's kind of a gangster element to it. But that's a perfect example of when you just have to go with the flow at times, because you're doing it on ultra low budget, level 5 lockdown, can't get props, can't get anything, nothing can be bought. And sometimes you just get on set, and we'd one or two examples of scenes being actually overwritten by me and you. Yeah. And it just didn't work. No. And we were going, fuck this, just strip it right back. Yeah. Let the actors fucking live in these characters.
Well, this is the thing, it's really true. I think with the Black Elf in particular, we seen how there's a manifestation of 3 scripts in every film. Like, so you have the initial writing process, then you get the filming process, and then the final process, which is the editing process, and all those 3 steps kind of rewrite the initial script.
Isn't that 3 films?
They're 3 films.
3 films, yeah. And all enjoyable in their own way.
Yeah.
Like, I obviously being an actor, I love being on set, and I love directing the actors, and I love watching performances. But the edit is so much fun as well, man.
That's great, isn't it?
Like, I love the edit.
Yeah, we always have good fun in the edit.
And we do mad 18-hour sessions in the edit.
Yeah. Oh, I tell you. And we're walking around and we're drunk from tiredness the next day.
Yeah, the other day we got a full cut done in one day.
40 something scenes. But I suppose we know what we're doing. We're not. You don't have to tune in an editor.
Exactly.
Because effectively we're hands on and we know exactly what we want
100%. So yeah, they're the kind of obviously type of films we want to continue making, and then we've next year a few more kind of similar kind of social narratives, important kind of stuff.
Well, the Screen Ireland contracts, which is great, like they're helping us develop Concrete Crayons and Tiger and
Minker's Widden, the Traveller one that I'm doing as well. Yeah. So they're kind of 3 more kind of social narrative films as well.
And they're good fun.
They're good fun, yeah.
They're good fun.
Yeah. They're not as dark as the Black Wealth.
No. And the dark, but there's lightness in the dark.
Oh, there is. There's a little bit, yeah. No, there is no. Actually,
there is.
The new from the reshoots.
Yeah.
That we
That's
put in.
really funny.
Oh, that stuff is hilarious. Like, the stuff with the lads, and we have Casper Walsh there from Versatile in there, and Dubzino,
legends.
And Casper's crew, those lads were fucking great as well. Like, they were brilliant. Never acted before in their lives, and they just naturals, and
like Boys in the Hood kind of thing.
It was Boys in the Hood. That's what it was like. Yeah, 100%. In Ringsend and real old Dublin.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And I'm glad we captured that
because that's gone.
Yeah, they're all gonna be, they're gonna be destroyed in fucking a Facebook building or something that's gonna go there. You know what I mean, like the rest of Dublin.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, they're the kind of things. And then documentaries, obviously, like our big documentary was Endless Sunshine on a Cloudy Day.
Yeah, Jade McCann and Anthony McCann. Two other legends. Leaving a big legacy.
Absolutely. Jade was a friend of mine, and I got the news that her father got cancer. Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, she got cancer. And then I was just telling you about it, kind of stressed about it a bit. And you said, look, what does she want to do? What's her kind of goal in life? Or I said documentary. Actually, that's how we met. She got in touch with me after watching one of my docs. I Am Traveller, the first one I did. And you said, look, why don't we just start doing a bit of filming with her? Yeah. And we'll follow a few different people who kind of overcome and struggle. But I suppose she was so powerful as a character, we just focused on her story, I suppose, rather than bringing other elements. And then her father and the struggle that he had to get her, really, and everything that came from that. Like, it became a really complex documentary to kind of figure out from our point of view actually what it was about, even.
Because that's the thing, like, how do you tell the story? Like, how do you tell a story, that, a daughter and a father both with cancer, like, and their struggles. How do you tell a story around that? It seems so bleak, and where do you find the humor? Like, there's a lot of humor in it.
Oh, absolutely.
Where do you find the hope?
Where do you find the hope? Yeah.
And I suppose it was a process for us as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, man. I mean, and like, it was kind of, you'd have to kind of put on a smiley face sometimes as well. Like, I mean, I remember you used to have me, you and Sean debrief. Yeah. And let's have a chat about today, like. Yeah. That was crucial.
Yeah, it was a tough one, all right.
Because you'd have to do that. Yeah. And once you did that would help. Yeah. And we were filming for a year and a half. Yeah,
it was a long time. It was like a deep dive. And I suppose Alan, Jade's brother, and Kim, Jade's mother, they're very close to us. We're kind of, we feel like they're part of our family, really.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So it was...
Lovely people, and they went through so much suffering, but the film stands as a legacy piece now for both of them. And actually, we won the Ryark Award.
Yeah.
That was just a few days ago.
And that was a biggie for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Jade and Anthony.
Yeah, that's, you know what? I never said that to you, and that's what I was thinking when I seen it.
Jade and Anthony, yeah.
I was thinking, there's a sign. Like.
And we won the Audience Award, the DIF, which is the biggest kind of award you can win in the country, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that'll stand the test of time.
Rain Dance,
we went
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island went to it, yeah. Other big festivals, like, so... Again, that was an important one. Like, I mean, it really opened my eyes to a lot of things, but with people with cancer, the kind of stigma that they go through. And then also, that was one element to it where he kind of felt dirty, and he felt sick and wrong and all that kind of stuff. But then the other element, which, I mean, we're going to explore more in future documentaries for sure, Tiernan. We both talked about this, is the online world. Yeah. And the toxicity from that. Yeah. It was shocking.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Shocking.
It kind of, we restructured the documentary around it because we felt it was such an important topic, in the sense of, I suppose when it comes to online, you've got Twitter, which is, a platform for hating on people. You've got Instagram, which is an aspirational thing. Everybody wants to put their best foot forward there. And you got Facebook, which is basically family pictures. It's a family album.
So right.
But there's a different feel and different aspects of those platforms. You know?
Yeah, that's why I got off Twitter. Twitter was just the worst for me anyway.
It seems to be kind of like the extreme platform, doesn't it? It's like people go to vent or something, you know. But I was surprised with Instagram, because Instagram, you're thinking it's kind of, you know, it's innocuous in the sense that, you know, people are there and they're trying to put their best foot forward and they're trying to, you know, this is my life and it's great, and they could be clinically depressed, but they're, you know, by all sense they're showing their best face, you know what I mean? So I was surprised in the negativity that was coming from Instagram in particular, with Jade, which they doubted that she had cancer. She had quite a rare cancer, and essentially she was looking at alternative kind of treatments abroad and stuff like this, and anywhere that could offer a little bit of hope, I suppose, and that was going to be expensive. So she started a GoFundMe, didn't she? And she was a beautiful young lady, very talented, very charismatic. She could have been a success in any field she wanted to go into, from singing all the way through to
Sinead O'Connor. She was like,
she was incredible.
Sinead O'Connor.
She was incredible, and she recorded a song, the Parking Glass. Tony McGuinness from Aslan was really, really generous.
He put all his time into that and produced that for
and Ray
and
as well.
And Ray, and that was amazing.
Incredible.
Such a brilliant, powerful, contemporary version of the Parking Glass. Yeah, I've never heard a version like that.
No, neither have I. It's just
the lads were brilliant there,
and they were very, very, you know, generous with their time with Jade, and I suppose that as well gave Jade it was almost like we were going through our wish list, wasn't it? Like, she wanted to get a song, she wanted to get the documentary, she wanted to get everything. So we were trying to fast forward everything to get it finished. You know,
this is a good time to talk about the Ericsson. Is the Ericsson?
Yeah.
What you have to pass through, just in the context of Jade as well there.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, there's I suppose he has a model where, you know, there's a stage model, a development model, where you, at different parts of your life, you have to, you know, you have to cross certain kind of psychological kind of maturation, maturity, kind of, what would you say, milestones, and it's all leading, unfortunately, to death. So it's basically. It's a development model of how the human being can basically navigate the world, knowing that we're on a non-stop trajectory to death. And how do you prepare for end of life so it doesn't become torturous? So there's certain experiences, and as you age and you pass through the normal lifespan, you should be learning these kind of psychological milestones, which kind of get you closer to the idea of letting go of the world. And death, really, for the ego, is alien. The ego doesn't understand that, you know what I mean? It doesn't want to know that. So a lot of people, you know, I suppose a religious aspect then is that, you know, we live forever, you know, that kind of, that's kind of tricking the ego to make it believe that there is life after that. Now, I don't know if there's life after that.
Yeah, no one knows.
No one knows, but that's a kind of a scientific look at a lens.
Yeah.
But I suppose the reality is, when somebody is coming close to the end of life and they may not have gone through the natural lifespan that would give them the opportunity to pass these milestones, I suppose kind of people who are looking, you know, after, you know, therapists and stuff would be helping the person get through these milestones very quickly. So I suppose one of the things for Jade was legacy. You know, she was a young girl in her prime, and I suppose the big question was, what has she done with her life? So I think this was a really important part of that progression through that model for her. So we were trying to hit these kind of milestones.
Fast forward them, really, like.
Yeah, just to give her, you know, give her a sense that she had achieved something really important, you know. Like, I think we all have to have a sense that we've left a mark, you know.
Yeah.
It's easy to I think, well, not easy, but it's easier to kind of go to the end of days when you feel like you've left a little bit of a mark.
And there are people who do that as a profession, don't they? They go on to someone's deathbed.
Yeah, there's therapists
and do that. Yeah. Have you ever done that type of work?
No, that's highly specialised.
Yeah, it's just very specific.
It's specific, you know, for that. And that's a tough game.
That's a depressing job, bro.
Yeah, that's a tough game.
I watched a great documentary, actually, Tiernan. It was called The Grief Walker. There was this fella who was a philosopher and a theologian, like, you know, masters kind of in both of them, from Harvard, one of them, a Canadian fella, and he was big into Indigenous kind of American and First Nation people, is Canadian, and their kind of culture and the kind of way that they view death.
Yeah.
You know, and this documentary called The Grief Walker. It's on YouTube to watch for free, but for me, it was fucking powerful. I watched it just a week after my grandfather died, you know.
Which was around the time we were filming
Jade. Yeah, I was looking after him while we were filming this, and looking after him with my brother and other members of the family, my mother and that as well. And he'd go to the bed and he'd give them options, you know? Like, and essentially what he was saying, and I'm paraphrasing basically, like, if you go out roaring, you are going to rupture the family. Yeah. You know? And he's giving them a straight reality, and it was tough to take, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what he was saying, basically, I think he said, how you die is going to determine how your family are going to either going to flourish after it and grow from it, or be completely fractured. So it's up to you what kind of death you want to give them, but it's going to affect them hugely one way or the other, you know. And then he started talking about the indigenous kind of peoples over there and their philosophy, which is that there is no life without death. It's a part of the cycle.
It's a cycle,
It's a cycle, and it's all coming together. And I suppose the whole thing was at a kind of his philosophy comes from kind of an attack on the Western religious idea that, you know, and living forever and all that kind of stuff, because he's seen how unhealthy it is, and it just grow, you know what I mean? So it was a great fucking documentary. But
that sounds great. I haven't seen it, man.
Well, fucking heavy job to have, like.
That is, but I suppose in some regards it is a certain type of person that can do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You have to have some sort of inner strength and a belief in what you're doing. Like, and you know, I believe in it, but I just don't have that kind of inner strength.
Yeah,
I just don't.
That's not for you. Like,
so they're very brave people.
How do you feel about that?
I don't know. I don't fear it. You know, I see it kind of as a cyclical part of life. You know, it says the day you come into this world is a day closer to when you're going to leave it. So I don't see it as something. I don't fear it. I drowned when I was a child, and I know what that feels like, in the sense of, you know, being brought around, resuscitated and stuff, and I've never really feared it since then. I've had a kind of an experience that has allowed me to kind of live life without really fearing it, you know.
So what in all the training you did, you had that kind of view already? I had a
view,
yeah,
but I didn't have a way of describing it or understanding it. I just had this kind of innate kind of fearlessness, and I had that as a kid. My mum used to say, you know, she still says it to me. She says, you know, she didn't know if I was going to come home alive when I walked out the door, because I just had this fearlessness, you know.
Yeah.
But then it was a case of, I suppose I honed my skills. You know, you do have these innate skills, and then with the training and with college and stuff, I kind of learned a lot more, and they encourage you to do a lot of introspection and a lot of work on yourself and trying to figure out, you know, your internal processes, because we're all different. Everybody's different. Yeah. We all have a different trajectory in life, different experiences. So I suppose it was about me kind of mapping my life and my experiences and using the skills that I've developed to have a better understanding of me, because I think as a therapist, you kind of have to have a blank slate as well in some ways, but we never truly have a blank slate. But you need to know.
You mean from bias and that, or you're saying, or?
Yeah, I suppose if you're working with people, you need to know your stuff and their stuff, you know, because there is this interaction, this transaction, you know, between people when you talk, you know. And I suppose there can be certain triggers, and there's unconscious triggers and unconscious biases that can be brought up in a session, and it's valuable to know yours, because if you know yours, you know what's yours and what's the client's. And there's a lot of things that aren't said in the therapy room, which gives a therapist, you know, more clarity sometimes than what is said. But you need to understand your own biases before you can actually see what is important when it's not said.
Now, when you first studied psychology, was it?
I did a degree in psychology, yeah, in DBS, Grey College.
What was that first year like? What was it, an eye opener?
Yeah, I suppose I went into psychology. This is the funny thing, right?
Yeah.
I went into psychology thinking I was going to be an analyst, right? And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to be like, you know, Freud and Lacan and Jung, and get in, you know, sit down.
Is
and,
that ego?
You know, kind of twist my moustache. I was going to, or my beard, right? And tell me about your life. And come up with this profound thing. So it's pure ego, right? So I went in there and I was thinking,
is that common across the board?
I think a lot of people go in, right, and they think that it's going to be analysis, right? But in reality, psychology is an onology. Onology means measurement. So what you're really measuring is kind of human behavior and stuff like that, right? And you're coming up with kind of a scientific aspect of how the human beings operate and making a scientific model.
So it's really academic.
It's very academic. It's very mathematic, right? Yeah. So I went in thinking, maths? Because it's all statistics. You got to prove your hypothesis. Yeah. So that kind of shocked me. And I think a lot of people, when they first go into psychology, that kind of, they think they're on in as to be analysts. You know? And they end up doing lots of maths. And they're like, why am I doing math? I don't want to be a mathematician. But it's really valuable because it allows you then to analyze papers critically. So if you understand the maths, you can then get a paper, and every discipline, no matter what you're doing, has its own language. So the first year in psychology, I was learning the language of psychology, what this meant, and the language of numbers. And I suppose when you then get academic papers and you're trying to be informed, then you can understand the papers, where a layperson wouldn't have a clue, or they'd just breeze over and go, oh, not for me. So the first year was learning that language so I could analyse the papers and get a better understanding of what was going on in psychology. So it was a great degree. It wasn't what I thought. But I ended up loving it, and I was... Just
break down, Tiernan, because there's a lot of confusion around psychology, psychotherapy, and psychiatry. People really don't know what's what. And they often confuse one for the other and what they're... So... We know what psychology is now, but let's look at psychiatry versus psychotherapy then.
Yeah, I think this is an important thing, because I think anything to do with kind of psychiatry or psychotherapy or therapy or counselling can bring a lot of fear for people. And if you hear somebody's been to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a psychotherapist, you kind of put them all in the same bundle, and you think shrinks, and you think these people that are going to them, crackers. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. They just think they're mad. There's something wrong with them. But that's not the case.
And the three very different fields.
They are, and within the fields, there's difference as well. So psychology could be a variety of things. You could have social psychologists. You could have cognitive psychologists. You could have
workplace kind of stuff.
Workplace organizational. You could have clinical counselling. There's a variety of different things. But the primary aspect of psychology is that they have, apart from clinical psychology, is where they use the knowledge acquired in psychology to work with clients and maybe to measure things. And a lot of clinical psychologists would use CBT. That would be their kind of modality. And then some of them would train in other modalities. But they would be CBT, because you can measure the outcomes of CBT where you can't really measure the outcomes of, say, psychoanalysis. Because 4 years and you're talking about childhood experiences versus... in CBT, you might be doing questionnaires. It's a very metric, numbers-friendly discipline. So it gets more credibility. So psychology always wants to have the proof. It's the doubting Thomas of the disciplines. It wants to show the proof. And CBT in particular is a discipline that can show outcomes.
Because that's the science part of it then.
It's a science part.
It becomes a legitimate science once it can measure and show results.
Yeah, so they say that, psychology in particular is a quasi-science. It's not true science. So psychiatry would be moving more towards a true science.
And that's because of the medical stuff?
Because it's very easy. You give somebody a drug and you measure before and after and you can see the outcomes.
So that's what psychiatry does. Psychiatry prescribes you medication.
So psychiatry generally is under the medical model, which is orientated around kind of, I suppose, psychopharmaceuticals, so giving you kind of medication for anxiety, for depression. Now, there are some really good psychiatrists that would be using psychotherapy, but in general, that model is based on a medical model, and it's more around medication. Now, psychotherapy is an unusual one. That's the poor brother of those other two disciplines, which is effectively, it's more humanistic, it's more qualitative than quantitative. It doesn't look at numbers, it looks at, the human experience as an experience. But you cannot measure, it's very difficult to measure outcomes in psychotherapy, apart from the likes of CBT and maybe systemics. So it becomes the poor brother because it hasn't got the outcomes, it can't fight for itself.
But it's probably the most challenging, is it? Like in terms of training, it'd be much, you have to go to way kind of darker places than you would just with psychology or psychiatry. Would that be fair to say?
Well, if you were kind of a clinical psychologist or a counselling psychologist would go similar to where a psychotherapist would go in training. Yeah, clinical psychologists would work in hospitals. They would do everything. It would be based on integrating themselves within that model, the medical model. And usually psychiatry is top of the tree.
Yeah.
And the psychology is kind of somewhere else in between it. So it's medicate and then use psychological interventions.
Yeah.
So with psychotherapy, it generally is outside of that platform, and it's kind of a little bit outside the medical model. Now, some psychotherapists work within the medical model. They work with psychiatry. But in general, it's a different way of treating the clients. It's a way of kind of treating them with I suppose Carl Rogers, it would be humanistic, about empathy, unconditional positive regard. It's about building a relationship and knowing that the relationship, that if you have this therapeutic relationship or alliance with a client, and you are there and you're there and you're unconditionally just thinking positively of them, that in its own right can really be effective as a tool in regard to recovery. So it would basically be the talking aspect of psychological or intervention. It's about the relationship and how you navigate that relationship, because we are creatures of relationship, and generally when our life is going wrong, relationships are going wrong. So if you go to a psychotherapist and you develop this kind of positive, kind of non-judgmental relationship, then it gives you the space to be able to to create a model of where to operate and to question yourself and to introspect and see how you're affecting your world, and then see how the world is affecting you. Now, with psychiatry, you may not necessarily get the opportunity to do that because you're medicated. So what they do is they dull the senses. So what you're doing is you might be operating in your world more effectively, but that's because you've reduced your capacity. So with psychotherapy, it's about kind of looking at how you operate in a system, and how everything you do affects everybody around you, and what everybody else is doing affects you. And it gives you a lens that you would not necessarily have had. Clinical psychology would branch into that. Counseling psychology, absolutely. But psychotherapy is about kind of introspection, looking at how you operate within your world and how the world reacts to you, and getting a kind of, I suppose, the power to be able to make decisions and choices, back to creativity, to change things.
What are the important years, Tiernan, for child development? What are those really crucial years? Because a lot of it goes back to childhood, isn't it? A lot of what we believe and all that is formed at childhood.
Yeah, we call it the formative years, but I suppose it used to be years ago people had it. This is back to kind of neuroplasticity and stuff. If we look at it in a brain, you can look at it in many lenses. Look at it in relationships, you can look at it, whatever. But if we look at it just as a simple thing, the neural aspect, they used to think years ago that once you developed, past a certain age, that your brain was locked, it was solid. It became this solid object that you couldn't change. And you hear all these kind of analogies of old dogs and new tricks and stuff like this. But in recent years, they've realized, and especially in cognitive science and neuroscience, that they've realized that the brain is plastic. It's like mala. So every brain is different. So the brain you had last week is very different from the brain you had this week. It's incredible. Like, it just keeps rewiring. So when it comes to kind of formative years, there are key things that are locked in, and then there's things that aren't really. So language, for example, that's language acquisition. There's formative years that you have to acquire language, and you'll see that young children can acquire language very young, and they basically they just take language in like a sponge. You see them learning multiple languages, and then as an adult you try and learn one and it takes you 10 years. Yeah. So their brain, the left part of the brain, which is the language center, is incredibly malleable. It's very plastic, very mala, and really the neurons are firing really fast, and that's set in stone really in some ways. So they reckon up to the age of 6 that kind of you've got to learn language, and if you don't learn language within those formative years, you're going to have difficulties. Now, what happened was, how the famous study was, they found this young girl, I think it was in one of the states of the satellite states of the Soviet Union, and it was around the time, poverty, extreme poverty, and she was abandoned in the forest, and she went to live with dogs, and dogs took her in as one of their own, like Tarzan, like. So they're known as feral children. And they found this young girl, and she was barking like a dog, and she was running around on all fours, and by all sense and purposes, she identified as a dog. And that's what she did.
And this is not some woke stuff.
This is real. So she identified as a dog, and that's her choice. But nevertheless,
that's her choice.
But she didn't really have a choice. But in reality, she you know, obviously the charities got involved, and they wanted to kind of bring her back into normal society. Real Tarzan story, but this is a true story. So they basically did a lot of research. So in some ways, she was, you know, kind of, you can look at the ethics of this, but in some ways she was kind of like a guinea pig for neuroscientists and behavioural scientists.
And when was this?
This would have been, I think, about the 80s and 90s.
Right.
But basically what happened was they found that they could teach her how to talk, but she couldn't understand certain aspects, you know, meaning of stuff. There's satire. She couldn't understand. It was very literal.
Irony and all that stuff.
Yeah,
sarcasm.
Yeah, and she had a limit to language acquisition.
Because she hadn't developed it from a young age.
And that part of the brain had finished that formative development. So that was a key thing in kind of, I suppose, neuroscience, behavioural science, cognitive science. That was a key kind of aspect towards kind of the theory of neuroplasticity. So there is parts of your life as a child growing up that are, you have to hit these milestones or you get locked out in some ways. But I suppose to answer your question about the formative development years, I suppose kids are like little sponges in general. So, you know, monkey see, monkey do, you know, which is back to the remember the mirror neurons? Yeah. So monkey see, monkey do. So even if they don't have language, they can still sense and they can still learn from behaviours. There was a famous one, psychological experiment with a Bobo doll. It was to do with aggression. And they could see that, you know, the more a child witnessed, you know, a doll being beaten, the more aggressive they became. So they do learn from the mirror neurons, like the same way as the bonobo chimps. So they pick up so much, and they're very, very smart in lots of other ways as well. Their brains haven't developed like an adult. So there's a lot of things they're not entirely clued into. They don't understand, like this feral child, they don't understand certain things that an adult would. So what happens basically is when you're an adult, you'll lock away the traumatic events that you were unbelievably, so, you know, bad. You might see somebody getting hit or something like this, and you'll bury this away. And as the years go on, your brain is a bit like Chinese whispers, will basically make it a really, really bad event, but it will keep it buried below in the unconscious. It'll try to repress it. And this will have a bearing on your life because you will react to the trauma in the behaviours that you do. So addictions, aggression, whatever. So these formative years for young children are key. But what's also key is that when you become an adult is to work through these traumas. So remember I said to you, the analysts will just talk about your family and you know how you were brought up. That's to figure out what the traumas are. Because when you analyse them and you reassess them with the adult brain, you have a different type of brain and you see things a lot differently. When you analyse them, you take the power out of them. And when you take the power out of those events because you've got an adult brain looking at what the child's seeing, then you relieve yourself of the destructive behaviours.
That makes perfect sense, man. And then, like, by what age do children form their worldview, their core beliefs? Like, what's the kind of...
I don't know. Every kid is different. You know what I mean? Every kid is different. You know, some kids, and not every kid develops at the same rate. You know what I mean? And, and I suppose, you know, childhood trauma will delay. Like we've seen it, like, you know, the groups that we've worked with, we've seen people, in particular with cannabis. Yeah. So what cannabis does is that somebody starts smoking it at 15. Then they don't reach these Erickson type milestones because what they've done is they've sedated themselves from the hardship of life, which is where we learn these things, these milestones, and they withdraw from it. So if you know somebody who's addicted to cannabis, they're like 15-year-olds if they start smoking it, even if they're 40.
Yeah, like Peter Pan.
Like Peter Pan. They just get locked in at that developmental stage and they don't get moved because they've been sedated and they're not basically going through the hardships, which is what creates the learning opportunity, the problem solving, and allows you to move through those different stages of development, like psychological development and maturity.
Yeah, and it's an absolute epidemic in this country, man.
It is. But like, listen, repression is a national pastime. Do you know what I mean?
It is, yeah. No, it is.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. It's Ireland's favourite fucking tool. I always say that as well. But there's that normalisation around cannabis. But obviously, look, there's an argument to be had. It's something that's going to come. Yeah, it's going to come to the forefront very soon. It's going to become a national conversation. Who knows? There could be a referendum on it. Like, yep. And I think it's probably important to break down the different sort of categories within it. Which is like, CBD versus THC is they're completely different conversations. Yep. But also like medical THC versus recreational. But it is a big, complex, nuanced conversation, Tiernan.
It definitely needs. I think it's an episode in its own right.
Yeah, I think we need to sit down and carefully construct that one day and break it down. Actually, the pros and cons of everything.
Because there is an argument and a counter argument, and I think a lot of people who are in one particular camp, when they see the counter argument to whatever their camp is, I think that's a useful tool. Yeah,
and I can see it. Look, I can see both sides of it.
Yeah, me too. So absolutely, I've got an open mind to it. Yeah. But I have seen, and it is about, kind of recreational use versus addiction, Yeah. I suppose in some regards you've got, alcohol, the famous, anybody that's, using cannabis recreationally will always compare it to alcohol, But if you do use that and you compare it to alcohol, you say, okay, there is people who can have a pint and go home, and then there's people who can't stop, alcoholics. It's the same with cannabis. Do you know what I mean? So there is a lot of people that can use it recreationally and whatever, but like addiction is addiction.
There's some people born addicts.
There's a theory that there is a genetic predisposition to addiction, but listen, when it comes to the nature or the nature-nurture debate, that's very complex, Yeah. What Netflix was a great documentary now, 3 Identical Strangers. Have you seen that?
Oh,
that's the nature-nurture debate.
That's powerful. Yeah. One went with, so there was 3 identical twin brothers who were put up for adoption, and one went with a working class family, one went with a middle class family, and one went with an upper class family. And the documentary was so interesting because it was really kind of camouflage and stuff, and making you think, oh, these are exactly identical, and then you figure out that they weren't. And actually, Tiernan, the happiest out of all of them was the working class fella who came from the immigrant family, working class kind of. It was a Polish family or something.
Yeah, but I think it was to do with love and attention.
Yeah, but it just ironically, money didn't come. It wasn't about money. Yeah, well, that was important.
I think the other families were chasing different aspirations.
Absolutely.
Which meant that they weren't around for
the working class family were so loving and gentle. Yeah. And it just showed how important that is.
They had nothing but love to give.
Yeah, exactly.
But it just shows you. But that nurture, I suppose the premise of that is, they're genetically identical, right?
So it's the perfect experiment.
So that's nature.
And and that's the thing we forgot to say. It was an actual fucking experiment by the American government,
yeah, they wanted to know about nature, no?
Yeah, so it was really fucked up, obviously, you know what I mean, but unethical, but it made for a compelling documentary,
And I suppose the thing is that you see what aspects of that was genetics and nature versus nurture and experience, But I suppose we are sponges, we're all sponges, and the good thing is to be a sponge for your entire lifespan. I think if you want to stay healthy into the older years, I think it's about kind of just being open to new information, taking new information on, keeping an open mind. One of the predictors, obviously I measure because it's the ology part of my profession. Yeah. So I'm always looking at kind of predictors in regard to outcomes for young people, that come through our program. And one of the predictors, I went through millions of different predictors, what personality type, somebody has this personality type. Are they going to have a good outcome versus this? Is it the amount of substance they're consuming? So I went through everything, loads of different things to measure to see what makes the perfect outcome for these people. And the only predictor that I found across the board for years of working with these guys is that people who are more open, so there's a personality trait of openness, people who are more open were more inclined to have a positive outcome from the program that we run. Now, this is interesting because I came across a lot of people who were agreeable but weren't open. And
that can send you down a bad road.
This is the thing. So sometimes people mistake agreeableness for openness, but they're 2 very, very different things.
You're looking for 2 different things.
2 different things.
Completely different
things. Openness is a good thing.
Yeah.
And open to new things, open to change, open to different perspectives, being respectful to different opinions, open to learning new tricks, open to be wrong.
Yeah, 100%.
Most people cannot be open to the prospect that they're wrong. There's only three ways of getting information. You accommodate, assimilate it.
We've seen a lot of times, me and you in the edit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where I was wrong or you were wrong or whatever, but we were both open to see.
After we have a little bit of it.
We do a little thing back and forth. But then we both always admit it. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. There's no ego in it then. Like, no, I'm not fighting. I'm not dying on the hill with this one. Like,
and the other thing
it's better.
We know each other so well. We know when we're bullshitting each other.
Exactly. And we know the ulterior motive sometimes.
You know what I mean? You go, So
but I have noticed though during the pandemic turning from there to now that at least there seems to be a bigger conversation about mental health and mental health problems. Like a lot more people are talking about it. Like I've even had old friends and all who getting back in touch with and talking about mental health, and it's kind of it's just unusual. It is becoming a conversation, which is encouraging because we come from such a fucking traditionally repressive society, Ireland. And it was just that's what we do, repress, and we talk about emotions when we get drunk, and that's when we have a hope.
Repress and then get depressed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the cannabis conversation is one that it's very important in terms of mental health, like, because it is affecting people big time. But what advice would you give someone who's going through that, just going through a rut and going through a bad phase? Maybe they haven't encountered this before, because that's what I'm seeing a lot. And then also someone who's struggling with that cannabis addiction. What kind of advice would you give those people?
It's a complex question.
Yeah.
And there's many answers to it, and I don't suggest that I have one answer,
Yeah.
But my feeling is, from my experience, really, I suppose, is that there is the next pandemic is a mental health pandemic, because there's going to be a lot of changes in this great world of ours because of COVID, and we haven't seen that yet, and we don't know what those changes are going to be. It could be economic, could be anything,
and also technology is going to change a lot.
Yeah, and I think
people are going to be like nothing to do. Like,
I think machines don't get sick.
Yeah.
So I think I suppose the industrial part of the world has recognised the vulnerability of a human workforce. So I think it's probably this is going to speed up automation, and there is going to be a lot of jobs that come from automation. But I think if you automate, it's like anything, you go back to the industrial revolution where you had people, in northern England in factories, and they were developing, fabrics or whatever, and it was a lot of manpower, and then automation comes in and it does put a lot of people out of work. So I think this is going to be, it's going to speed up. So there will be, I think, an economic shift on the planet. And I think that is going to rattle people. Their value system is going to be rattled, because a lot of people have this idea that their worth is based on what they can acquire in life and their status and stuff like this. And I think there's going to be an existential crisis where people have to reevaluate their worth and what they're actually doing as human beings on this planet. But that's in the kind of long to medium term. But in the short term, I think there's a lot of people coming out of the pandemic, and they've experienced a lot of hardships. They could be at home, and that presents a lot of problems, being at home for long periods.
Absolutely.
And I won't get into that, and that's but it does present a lot of problems. So I think there is a lot of people who are suffering in silence. And I suppose for those people, I think what you've got to do is you've got to be open to the possibility of thinking a different way, doing a different thing, and pushing yourself to make the changes that you need to bring happiness back into your life.
Yeah, that goes back to what you told me, which is control your thoughts, because your thoughts control your emotions. And that's a big thing. Like, if you can manage to do that and fucking zone in on that.
And challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Be open to new prospects, new ways of being, new concepts, new ideas. Challenge yourself. And above all, talk.
Yeah.
Because if you don't talk, no one's going to come.
Yeah. It's a big dirty secret. And it holds power of it. It's like fucking Voldemort and fucking Harry Potter.
And it makes you feel alone.
Yeah.
And I think that that in its own right creates problems. And I think what happens is, if you stop talking, you might be doing that because you're ashamed and you see mental health or issues relating to mental health as something that is a stigma. We still have that Victorian kind of opinion towards mental health, which is that it's a shameful thing. We all have fluid mental health. Some days I'm in great form, other days I'm not. But I'm kind to myself. I realise that, it's okay to not feel okay. But when it doesn't become okay is when I start to hold it all in and I don't talk to people about it. So I'm quite verbal. I'll talk to you, when I'm not doing too well, and then vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely.
We talk about it,
Yeah. Yeah, that's the main thing, talking about it, isn't it, Tiernan?
It is.
That's
and
where
be
you start. Open.
And challenge yourself.
Yeah, and it's like there's, because it's, as you said, Tiernan, it's so complex. There's just not one answer to this thing. But like I find that, when you go into bouts of depression, you're encountered with so many different problems, but so many different thoughts. But one of them is like just wallowing in your own pity and, and feeling sorry for yourself. And that's not to downplay fucking the power of depression and the darkness of it. I've went through it over and over for years since I was a child. But you have to, for me anyway, because I got enlightened. I'm able to kind of verbalize this now just because I had a conversation a couple of months ago with this woman. And, she didn't know me from Adam, and we had a good conversation. But she was talking about mental health, and she was talking about, she got a bit drunk, and she said she suffers with depression and that. And I was trying to give her a bit of advice. And I said, look, you just need to get yourself up and out. I know that's difficult, though. I know that it's hard sometimes. You don't want to leave the fucking bed.
Absolutely.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But you have to search for something inside you and go, I have to get out of this fucking bed. And you get out of the bed, you do feel better, and even going back to the Jordan Peterson thing, clean your room, man, it just fucking help.
But that's so important. And I have a lot of differences with Jordan Peterson.
You do, yeah. But you would even say that cleaning your room, you do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it was so much resistance from her. And she was like, you don't fucking know. And I said, well, you don't know nothing about me. Like, I actually do know. And I know that you can spend a long time in that bed and it's going to get worse. And then you're left with your own thoughts. At least if you try your best to summon that bit of strength inside you and get outside, go for a walk, whatever it is, a swim, and you're doing an action, and it's easier to control your thoughts. You know what I mean? And then tomorrow is always better. That's the fucking thing about it. Like, if you get up and do something, tomorrow is better.
Yeah.
And then it goes, because like happiness isn't all the time, like, and depression isn't all the time either.
See, this is the thing, right? I think this is kind of CBT, and CBT is very good at kind of dealing with depression and getting people moving again.
Yeah.
And what I mean by challenge yourself is that, you don't have to set yourself big goals in life. People have these big aspirations and huge goals that they set that in some regards can be quite unachievable, and that can create more depression because it's like you're not hitting these goals. So the important thing in life, exactly what you're saying, which is just remember the small details, the small goals, and just line them up and do one thing at a time. And if it means you're depressed and you're lying in your room and the world feels very dark and you feel alone, just get up, put makeup on, or brush your hair, or do the smallest thing and know that you've achieved it. And then the next day, get up and do a little bit more. And slowly but surely, you'll find your legs, Yeah. And then it's about getting out there and re-engaging. As I said to you, we're social creatures. Re-engaging with society in whatever way that is, that capacity. But you have to start off with a small goal. So it's like somebody in rehabilitation from an injury. If somebody had an injury on their leg, they're not going to go out the next day and run a marathon. But sometimes the depressed mind feels that if they can't get up out of that bed and run the marathon tomorrow, then they're a failure. And then they don't even attempt it.
Setting these big, huge, unrealistic
goals. Where, somebody who's hurt their leg and are in rehabilitation, they'll take a really slow, small achievable goals, and then slowly they'll add up and they'll get to where they want to be. So it is about kind of setting your mind on these small tasks. Challenge yourself. Always challenge yourself, and just keep pushing forward and positively pushing forward. So not setting yourself up to fail, setting yourself up to succeed. And if you do this with one goal and the next goal and the next goal, well, the outcome is success. Do you know what I mean? Like, you cannot fail with that model. Like,
yeah. Look, with that, no, man, I think we just rounded off by saying, like, we're going to cover, like, a lot of these topics around mental health, creativity, art, I suppose, culture,
culture,
expression, not repression.
Yeah.
I suppose kind of like our ethos here. and the importance of all of those things, and staying on top of that. And sure, we'll have the crack as well.
We'll have the crack, and we'll have some interesting guests as well. So we're going to be bringing in people that has a different worldview than anybody else in some ways, and interesting guests with interesting stories that, you know, work in the creative worlds and a variety of different kind of avenues in life. So we could have an astrophysicist one day and a
comedian the next,
and a comedian the next,
and find out their journey and what got them there. Like,
yeah,
absolutely. And then more of these sit downs with me and you. Sometimes we'll break down a topic.
Yeah,
and, you know, and other times we'll get looser. It may, you know, vary, but we'll continue doing these. And what you can expect, essentially, is 2 podcasts a week, one with me and Tiernan on various different topics, and then a guest.
And then we'll also have, we're probably as a subset to these kind of episodes, we're going to have an After Dark series, which is a lights out, very intimate series where we get really down deep and psychological. And we'll have some very interesting guests, and we bring them to places that they probably never thought they were going to go. So you're going to see psychology in action.
Really excited about that. And then also, as I mentioned earlier on, we're going to be doing doc casts.
Pod docs.
Pod docs. Is that what we're going? Yeah, that's better. Pod docs is better. So a mixture of a podcast with a documentary. And as far as I can see, it's never been done before.
Oh, and it gives us opportunities. We have a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
And it gives us an idea of, you know, bringing people in and getting a flavour of a particular doc that we may, create into a TV doc or into a feature doc.
Absolutely.
But it'll be a test bed for us as well as a film company.
So there you go. Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll catch you the next time. You can follow us on social media at Clusterfox Podcast.